Dr. Pearl will play for us My Favorite Things by the great duo Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein. And we'll play a variation on this by John Coltrane. But it made me think of the uncanniness of our lives sometimes. And it made me think of a story from my own clinical practice. For many years, I took care of then two brothers with Canavan disease. And one of them, as the disease progressed, it was quite clear to all of us that his days were quite numbered. And by that point in time, as best we could tell, he was the oldest person with Canavan's disease on the planet. The family was very clear that they did not want him to die in a hospital. Their home had actually been converted to a small cottage hospital with medical equipment such that almost anything could be done except those things which they would never do, intubate him and engage in cardiac resuscitation. So after he'd had a fairly significant hospitalization, we'd all had this long discussion, all the teams taking care of him, that it was really time for him to go home and to spend the end of his days there. I came by every day or two to make a house call to see how they were doing. The family was attended by a large group of friends, but three of us were fairly regular in our arrival there. Myself, father's best friend from childhood, really, who lived not far away and was there frequently, and then the rabbi. But mostly, the three of us were never quite there at the same time because of different schedules that we ran. Sometimes two of the three of us, but never really the three of us. One day I came, and as it happened, the friend was there and the rabbi was there, and I went to the bedside to look at this young man and went over to talk to the family. And then when I came back to the bedside, I realized that in the interval that I'd been talking with the family, he'd actually breathed his last and had died. I made certain of that diagnosis and then told the family. The rabbi, since he was there, circled us around and led those of us who knew the appropriate prayers for the dead. And in all these years that I'd worked with the family, it was actually the first time I'd ever seen the father actually cry. He was a lovely man, but he had always been strong for his family. After all that time had passed, we then all went about our various tasks. Mine was to fill out the death certificate. And I was sitting at the desk in this room where the boys were taken care of. The rabbi came over and thanked me for everything I had done for the family. And I had that thought, I'm sure most of us do, at a time like that. If I'd done my job better, we wouldn't be here. So I'm not quite sure what I was to be thanked for. And so I said something to demur and defer that along the lines of, well, Rabbi, thanks, but what do you think the odds were that the three of us would be here at this particular moment, that this just happened to happen? And the rabbi smiled and said, this had nothing to do with luck or chance. He said, in my tradition, we say, es war beschreibt, it was written. This was written in the book of life before you and I were born, before this world was even put together. This is where you were called to be. And here you are. And I think about that a lot these days because we all find ourselves in very strange and unpredictable and unfamiliar places. But I think actually we are actually now all called where we are meant to be.
Welcome back to the next segment of American Creativity, Ingenuity, and Diversity. We're going to go right to the Great American Songbook. Probably the most prolific team was Richard Rodgers, who wrote the music, and Oscar Hammerstein, who wrote the lyrics to so many Broadway shows. a duo of Jewish American musicians who contributed to the Great American Songbook, along with so many others. And the last show they wrote was The Sound of Music, of course, based on the famous von Trapp family that had to escape their home in Austria and Nazi Germany, and ended up here in New England. And you can even visit the von Trapp family household if you travel here. So one of my favorite pieces, I think a lot of people's favorite pieces, is My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music. And one of the reasons I want to play it is because it was taken by the great African-American bebop musician John Coltrane, called Train. And in 1961, now the show was written in 1959, but just a couple years later, in 61, John Coltrane recorded it, and it's one of the most famous of the Train recordings. So I'd like to go ahead and play My Favorite Things, but kind of in the style that Coltrane used, and to hear the mixing of the Great American Songbook with the bebop style and the great African Americans who took the Great American Songbook and made these just classical, beautiful pieces. So please enjoy My Favorite Things by Rodgers and Hammerstein, and stylized by John Coltrane.